All right, in this video, we're going to answer a really important question, and that is, do I have enough liquidity to pay for upcoming emergencies or pay for potential emergencies? So one of the things that unfortunately a lot of people don't have is the ability to pay for upcoming emergencies. In fact, there was several studies that have been done recently that ask if people could pay for basic emergencies like $1,000 car bill or $1,000 medical bill. And the lion's share of people surveyed simply don't have enough liquidity, enough cash on hand to be able to pay for that without going into debt, which is a really scary thought. So one of the things we're going to do in this video is we're going to answer that very question using some mock financial information. So if we want to figure out if we have enough liquidity to pay for a potential emergency, what we do is we want to calculate what we call a liquidity ratio. And a liquidity ratio is really rather simple. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking our monetary assets and we're going to be dividing that by our monthly expenses. Now, in a previous video, we talked about monetary assets a little bit. So if you want to go back and look through that, just for a little bit of background information on monetary assets, that would be helpful. Essentially, monetary assets represent things that can be converted into cash fairly quickly. So think cash on hand, checking accounts, savings accounts, usually is what comprises monetary assets. And then, of course, we have our monthly living expenses, which represent those expenses that we have in a given month. And so if you build yourself a zero-based budget, you should know what it costs you to kind of run your household for a given month. And so we're going to use this to figure out ultimately how much what we call runway do we have. So I'm going to keep this example fairly simple just for calculation purposes. And we're going to assume that we have $6,000 in monetary assets. And so that can be cash on hand, again, checking accounts, savings accounts, as long as it's liquid and we can get access to it really quickly, right? If it's in the stock market, it's inherently unliquid because although you can certainly liquidate your brokerage account, you might be forced to take a loss, and that might not be something that you're willing to do. So we're going to just use monetary assets, and we're going to divide that by our monthly living expenses. And so for the sake of this example, let's say that our living expenses are $6,000 as well. And so we're obviously going to get to an answer of 1. What this means is that we have enough cash on hand, liquid cash, to cover 1 month of living expenses. Now, on the surface, that might sound like it's pretty good. But the reality of it is generally speaking, most financial advisors recommend having at least 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses on hand. So although 1 month is certainly better than nothing, 1 month is not as good as 3 to 6 months, and is certainly not going to give you as much of a cushion if there was a big emergency, right? Now, if it was a $1,000 medical bill, this could probably be something we can handle pretty easily. But if we were to suffer a layoff or a job loss or disability or something of that nature, we would really want a little bit of a buffer, if you will, to set aside so that we're not in a position to have to scramble. And that's exactly what the liquidity ratio is designed to help us to do, is to determine whether or not we have enough assets to have a little bit of runway. Now, there's a couple of things that we can do here, obviously. The first of which is you can, of course, increase your monetary assets. And so that's what we commonly call an emergency fund. So emergency fund usually consists of 3 to 6 months of living expenses, and it's designed to provide a cushion. It's very liquid, so you don't invest it in the stock market. You have it in maybe an online high-yield savings account or another savings account with your local bank, and it's designed to be accessed fairly quickly. The other thing we could do is we can trim monthly expenses. So in a job loss, most likely, I know I personally would, I would have probably some expenses to cut, right? I would probably be able to cut my cable subscription. I probably wouldn't have to pay for as much variable expenses like gas and different things because I probably won't be driving very much. And so there's certainly an opportunity to trim expenses there, but it's generally good to have roughly that 3 to 6 months, just to provide peace of mind in case something were to happen. So I encourage you, gather the data and try to calculate the liquidity ratio for your own personal finances and get a gauge on roughly where you're at and see if it's necessary to make any adjustments.